Let's do this. All right, everyone. We are here with Preston Van Loon from the Prysmatic ETH2 client team. Preston, you want to say hi?
Hey, happy to be here.
Thanks for coming on POV Crypto. Really appreciate you giving us some of your time. Preston, can you kind of explain, give us your background as to how you came to be in Ethereum, how you came to be an ETH2 client dev, and how you came to be where you are today?
Yeah, okay. So I'm the co-founder of Prysmatic Labs, and we're building an ETH2 client. But how I got started, so I was previously working at Google, and kind of exploring around other technologies and stuff like that. And in 2017 is when I first heard of Ethereum, so kind of later than a lot of people, but still I think pretty early. So I started kind of messing around, heard about this technology. My friend told me about it. He said it's like Bitcoin, but you can run applications on it. So you can do more, basically do more than have peer-to-peer money. So it was interesting to me. I was wondering how can you do that? That sounds like a really cool idea. And this was, like the summer of 2017. So the price is like 200 or so. And I bought a little bit and it started going up. And I'm like, what is this? And, messing around with apps and stuff. And then by the end of 2017, this is huge bubble of excitement, and seeing the network so congested like that for the first time made me think like, wow, this is really cool technology, but it doesn't scale for shit. Like we can only get 14 transactions per second. That's not that's not going to keep up a global scale. So I wanted to get involved because I like building and messing around and breaking stuff, and I was really interested in Ethereum. So I started reaching out on different channels, and I met Raul Jordan online, and he said to me, hey, I'm going to be in New York in a couple days. And I was living in New York. We should meet up for coffee or whatever. So I said, okay, why don't you come by my office and we'll get some coffee. And I gave him the address to Google. So that I don't think he even knew I worked there, but we met up at Google and had a coffee and said, there's this plan for the next iteration of Ethereum, switching to proof of stake and proof of stake and sharding and all these things, but no one's building it. Like we've just been doing research and talking about it. So why don't we just put together a team? So we put together a team right there and just kind of did it as a moonlighting passion project just to have fun. And we met Terrence and Nishant and all these other guys on our team, and it just kind of grew more and more beyond what we expected. And by the end of 2018, we were all quitting our jobs to work on it full time. And that's kind of how I'm here.
So when you guys decided to spin up the Prysmatic team, it was more of just like we'll work on this after normal work hours, right? It's like this is my hobby, this is your hobby, let's just work on this after work. Did you at that time, A, is that a correct interpretation? And B, at that time, did you think that perhaps one day this would become your full-time job?
Yeah, exactly. So we were just working on it after work, and Raul was he was already just looking for his next project. So I think he was working on it full time at that time, or more than anybody else. But certainly myself and Terrence and Nishant were all working full time at other companies. So we're just working on it in the afternoons, the evenings, and for me, I found the morning to be most productive. So I'd actually wake up 3 hours before work and do Prysmatic stuff, and then go to Google and think about it all day, then come back home and like write it up. I couldn't do work at Google for this, obviously, but I really never imagined that it would get to this point. We kind of thought like, we really like the Go Ethereum project, and we're really interested. So all we really wanted out of this was just to learn and like to build and give back and kind of make it better. And we never thought that we'd get funding. And then when the EF said they were giving out grants, we applied and we got approved, and we're like, wow, okay, so there's some real money there. And then there was the Ethereum Community Fund where they gave us some money, and they flew two of us to Japan to accept it, and that was really cool. So we're kind of like, in this unique spot that we've already like and this is just like March, so it's only been like 3 months, and all this stuff's happening. So we knew that what we were doing was going to be important, it was going to be cool, and that people were recognizing that, and it just, yeah, it kind of snowballed from there.
So am I correct to say like you guys were kind of struggling to find funds and we're all working full time, and Vitalik threw you guys a bunch of ETH? Is that the right story?
Yeah, that was the YOLO fund, the YOLO day. So like we had received some grants, and it was like on the order of like $250,000 or something like that, and that was funding a lot of the work, and it was paying Raul to work full time, and myself and Terrence and Nishant to just kind of work half time or whatever, part time or whatever, after hours. But it wasn't enough to take 4 people full time. I mean, we would have run out of money in 1 quarter. So I said, I think Amin from Spring Chain was on Twitter, and he was saying, you know, why aren't we throwing more money at the problem? Like, or what's holding up ETH2, or why isn't it going faster? And I just put it out there. I said, you know what, we have to spend 40 hours of our week at our employer to keep the lights on at home, or something along those lines. Like, so it's like our biggest distraction is we have to go to these companies that we don't really, and go work on stuff we don't really want to work on, because it's, you know, keeping our lifestyle the same. You know, I live in New York, and Terrence in San Francisco, and we couldn't just jump out, and because we never thought we'd get money anyway, and now, you know, we didn't think there would be more, or just sort of whatever. And then I was making dinner, and my phone starts kind of blowing up, and I see that Vitalik had sent 1,000 Ether to our multi-sig Prysmatic's wallet. And I just was like blown away. And then he did it 2 other times that day. He gave it to Sigma Prime, and he gave it to ChainSafe. So he's took his own money, not the EF's money, and kind of was like signaling that this is, again, a big deal, and that he's willing to pay for it. So that was cool.
So, I mean, kind of on that tip, like obviously there is a lot of like crowdsource excitement and funding going on around projects in the Ethereum space. I think it's pretty undeniable, just the community around that. Like, how, I guess this could be towards both you and David. Like, how do you feel about the sustainability of that culture? Like, can that culture scale as Ethereum grows? Because I would say like that's something that, you know, I think is optimistic, but I don't think is like something you can count on forever.
I can say something, Preston, if you don't have an opinion on that.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, part of this is just a directly a result from like the ICO pre-mine, right? Like Vitalik had a bunch of ETH because he had it from Genesis, right? That probably came from the Genesis block, or a couple of transactions later, right? And so, and it went straight into the hands of the developers who are building out the commitment to build out ETH 2.0. I do think over time that it's good that these funds are finite, right? Like Vitalik didn't press the mint button, he pressed the transfer button. So like, it's good that this funds will run out, but also at the same time, I'm absolutely it's critical. It's critical that these funds actually existed and were available for teams like the Prysmatic team and the ChainSafe team, so that they could do their job that was described in the white paper. To your point, CK, I do think that at some point in the future, that's not going to be the way that it is. But the hopes is that with the pre-mine, with the ETH initial funds, that they can get Ethereum into the state that it has always been promised. And that's what I see happening here.
Also, just to add on before Preston jumps in, like I'm even talking more like broadly, like, okay, so obviously the EF, Vitalik, whatever, they have their coins, they can chill out stuff, but there's also Gitcoin, there's a lot of stuff going on there. Like, what do you think, what's your like assessment of like the altruism that's kind of embedded in the ETH community right now, and is that sustainable? Preston, got anything?
Is that question directed for me?
Sure, why not? David keeps talking.
Yeah, you know, the whole funding thing has been interesting because this is, a decentralized platform and it's not using traditional fundraising. Like we didn't go to VCs. All the money we've raised so far has been, a grant. So, no equity or anything in exchange, just the promise that we're going to do what we said we would do. And I think the pre-mine funds, I mean, that's what, like David was saying, and that's what this is intended for. It's intended to build the platform and kind of fulfill this promise. If even at the beginning when ETH launched, there was always this plan to go to proof of stake. Like we never were going to stay on proof of work forever. So I think that ETH2 is part of the promise that was sold for the pre-mine. So that's great. But yeah, like Dave was saying, it is finite. So there are other solutions being looked at for how do we pay to maintain ETH, like who pays for that? And things like Gitcoin grants have been really, I think, a success. And then there's been talk about, what if we took one GUI out of every transaction and threw that into a dev fund? Ideas like that. It's kind of hard to.
Why don't you like that, CK? CK is giving the thumbs down if you missed that.
Who decides where that fund is allocated? That is the main problem.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, you're kind of in the same spot you are today with the EF, except that this would be the protocol level thing. So it could be a DAO, but those aren't perfect either. I don't know. I didn't say it's a good idea. I just said it is a idea. It's not my idea. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting for sure.
I would say if something like that happened, it would be bearish. But yeah, I know David wants to talk a lot about like forecasting into ETH2.
Sure, I mean, it's an important conversation, right? Because but I think what you're really trying to get at, Christian, is like this funding is not going to be in 5-10 years of Ethereum's future. Like the funding that we see today is not going to be the funding that we see at that point in time. Like there is a lot of more. Sure, yeah, but those funds need to come from somewhere. And like the fact that, in the grand scheme of things, we're not that far away from the moment of the Ether pre-sale, right? Like it's only 5 years. And so like we're still in that context. And so there is a lot of altruism. There is a lot of gifting. There is a lot of Gitcoin grants. Like the reason why Gitcoin grants works is because it's totally subsidized. Like the fund matching doesn't come from nowhere. Like somebody's giving away that money. I do expect that at some point there's just less money to give away because this thing hits maturity. Okay, moving on into subjects. Preston, we initially reached out to you kind of in the wake of this AMA that happened on Reddit, where caused a bunch of a hubbub on Twitter, and then the block wrote this story about how ETH2 core dev says that phase 1 isn't going to launch until 2021, and everyone gets upset. And so kind of wanted to hash that out really quick. So in the last, the first initial timeline projection, and I know that these are all nebulous timelines given by perhaps not a complete consensus of all devs, but the first initial timeline that we got was Q1 2020. Which came and went, and then it was kicked down the road. Everyone kind of saw that coming, expected it. But the potential, the mention of perhaps that phase 0 isn't going to launch until Q1 2021 was apparently a bit of a blow to the community. Can you kind of talk about what's been going on with phase 0 and what's been kicking that can down the road for so long? What were the big obstacles?
Yeah, sure. So maybe it's worth looking back at sort of the whole history of ETH2 since Prysmatic started working on it. At least that's kind of when I got involved in the beginning of 2018. And now at that time it was just research notes, maybe a couple of posts on ETH research, but it hadn't taken anything like its form it is today. So at the beginning of that time, of that year, in March or maybe in April, we all got together in Taipei, Taiwan, and kind of talked about the spec, what it might look like. And I think at this time we're still in a pretty heavy R&D phase. So everything we were working on was experimental. And then just a couple months later, in the middle of the summer, in the middle of the year, there was another meeting I think in Berlin, and it ended up with a complete rewrite of the whole spec. Like everything's redesigned and totally different.
That's where sharding and staking got integrated into the same rollout. Is that what happened then?
Yeah, that's when because at the end of 2017, they were testing the research. If the Ethereum Foundation research team was testing out proof of stake, so switching ETH to proof of stake instead of proof of work, and realizing this is going to be a pretty volatile upgrade, and so with sharding, just decided why not do one painful upgrade instead of two. I was able to merge them together, so all sort of makes sense. And so that happened in the middle of the year. So we spent the next like 6 months, the remainder of the year, kind of experimenting again and working and keeping going. And then I don't know, in the middle of 2019, it had taken sort of its first final form. The first code freeze we had was in the middle of the summer, and I think that's when we said, "Oh yeah, it's going to launch in Q1 2020." Right, because we got 6 months to test it out, and then we'll launch sometime in the beginning of next year after the holiday. But then the spec was unfrozen and then radically changed again over the next 6 months. I think after DEF CON, we went from the idea that we would do 1,024 shards to simplifying it to just 64 so that we could get cross links happening faster, and there was some concern about cross chain transactions and things like that, and they're taking too long. So starting out with 64 shards would still solve the majority of our scaling issues. We didn't really need 1,024 to start. So that kind of pushed it back the first time. That was a big delay. And then through the beginning of this year, we've been working on the spec, and it's sort of second final form. It still hasn't been frozen yet, but all of the commitments from the foundation and all the client teams, we're not going to change it. There's just a few like networking parameters and things that they're trying to lock down, and then we'll launch with that later this year. But when there was the AMA, we had Justin Drake kind of taking his point of view of where everything stood and sort of what was left, and he listed out 3 big things. So we need a proof of a multi-client testnet with multiple clients running for 2 to 3 months. We need to have an attack net, which is like a incentivized single client network where if you're able to take it down, that you get a bounty if you can prove how you did it and stuff like that. So it's kind of like a bug bounty in a sense, if you could break this thing. And then the third thing, but the attack net runs for 2 to 3 months as well in parallel. And then the third thing was like an EF sponsored bug bounty. So they would actually put, say, hey, if you can find a critical bug, we'll give you $500 or something. If you can find a severe one, they'll give you 5,000 or something like that. Just making up those numbers, it might be more, it might be less, I don't know. But that also would take 2 or 3 months. So all these things in parallel, if you look at it and they're all running right now, we could be getting a green light in 3 months. But I think what Justin was being a little bit careful or maybe even pessimistic by padding that result. So like, okay, well, maybe the soonest we're ready is the end of Q3, the beginning of Q4, but then you have like all these U.S. holidays and global holidays that get in the way. So you have like Thanksgiving and this is the end of year holidays. So basically Q4 is like the least productive quarter of the whole year. So this is, since we're probably going to be delayed a little bit, let's target January 3rd, which is Bitcoin's birthday. And this people were particularly sensitive because it's already been delayed. And in fact, Justin's already made this claim before that we're going to do it on January 3rd without talking to anybody about it. He just kind of blurts it out. And since he's on the research team and sort of one of the lead guys, some people take that really literally. And we found we were surprised to hear January 3rd again. And I think everyone even people participating in the AMA were surprised. But yeah, I don't share that point of view. I think that we'll have all these things done by the end of Q3, and then we're going to just be, doing release testing and secondary audits and things like that for the remainder of the year, but I'm really confident it's going to launch in 2020.
So, I mean, outside of the actual AMA, what I think is even more interesting is the display of governance, if you were to say, that we saw over social media and Twitter in I guess it was like the week following. But it sounded like what we know of the Ethereum community said that they weren't okay with that timeline. And then Justin came out saying, hey, we're going to make it happen. And Vitalik responded under saying like, maybe it's not as many clients as we wanted, but we'll get something going for sure. So like what's your reaction to just seeing that chain of events?
First of all, I get it. I get Justin's thinking here. The ETH Genesis date is going to be very symbolic in the history of ETH, and aligning that with Bitcoin is kind of like a tribute to Bitcoin, as like we all started with Bitcoin and then Ethereum came out of that. So if we could align it and do it on the same date, that would be cool. That would be really cool. And if it turns out that ETH is delayed and we're talking about like December 26th versus January 3rd, like maybe it's worth delaying 1 week just to get this cool date. But if we're talking about 2 months, like we're not going to delay it artificially just because it's a cool date. And I like being so involved, working with all the other clients. I'm pretty confident that we're going to have at least 2 and probably 3 pretty stable clients to choose from for users. So I get why he said that and what it was, and Justin Drake's awesome. But I think it wasn't discussed with anybody, and it wouldn't have been such a big fuss if we just talked about it in a core devs call or something like that.
Yeah. It's kind of hilarious how and why this turned into like a bunch of hubbub. So my next question for you, Preston, is who or how really decides at the end of the day when phase 0 launches? Like, how does this decision actually manifest?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a good question, and like the true answer is the people putting in their ETH in the Genesis are the true deciders, because we could put the contract out today and say, here's our code. I'm not confident it's going to work, but you can do it, and so they can launch it. They're the only ones who can launch it. I don't have enough ETH to launch ETH2. I don't think Vitalik does. Like, none of us do. So, or maybe he does. I don't know what he's got or anybody's got. But the point is, like, it's a combination of the signal from the developers, the signal from the EF. So actually deploying the deposit contract and calling it canonical and like having this proof that this is the right one. And then the signal from our auditors, the security auditors, saying like, look, we went through everything and it's safe to use, and here's some best practice guides and getting things set up. That's going to be what's driving it forward. So, yeah.
So it's just a matter of the code being made public and then a contract address being made available on Ethereum 1. And then
how many ETH deposited?
Yeah, and then a bunch of ETH gets deposited.
How many?
And there needs to be one sort of I think it's 2 million.
Yeah, it's 16,800 and something validators, multiples of 32. So that's what you need to start it. But no one's going to, and all the code's open source, but no one's going to do that if they're not confident that it's ready.
Right, of course. Okay.
Yeah, okay. It's a combination of all that.
Okay. So yeah, so the client teams make the code public, and then someone runs the code using a contract address on Ethereum 1. And then there's some sort of determination that's like, okay, this network that is being run by this group of people is what we are going to call Ethereum 2. And then that's the thing that connects to the Ethereum 1 deposit contract. How does that work?
Yeah, so what'll happen, like the timeline and plan for E2 launch is that, first of all, we'll put that deposit contract out there, or at least at least we'll use something like create2, where we know what the deposit contract address is going to be, but we're not going to put anything there until we're ready. And so what we could do is on the client teams is bake in that address, that configuration, and get everything ready, and then we can tag a release, say this is the version 1 software that we're ready to launch with. It's not beta, it's not alpha, it's ready to go. And then someone's going to launch the deposit contract, and now we have both the pieces we need to get started. So we can launch at that point. So
part of Ethereum is that we have multi-clients, right? So when phase 0 rolls around and it's time to get started, what clients do you think are really going to be present and available and ready and show a strong force? And what client team? Yeah. So yeah. Yep. So yeah, part of Ethereum's ethos is having multiple options for clients to use. Bitcoin has multiple clients as well, but really there's only one that most people use, the main Bitcoin core client, where Ethereum's been much different, especially because they like to move faster and sometimes break things. So having a fallback option is good for the network, so that there's no long-term effects if there is an issue. You just switch over to another implementation that doesn't have that bug until your favorite one can fix it, and then you're good to go. You can still transact and do whatever you want. And in the event of a consensus bug, if there are 3 options and only one has this bug, well, the chain will continue on because the majority is using the correct implementation. So that's kind of why we really want to have so many. And right now, when we look at the multi-client testnet for Altonia, we have 3 or 4 main players in there right now. We have Lighthouse from Sigma Prime, Nimbus from Status, we have Teku from Consensus, and then we have the Prism client from Prysmatic Labs. All of these look like great contenders to go to mainnet. I can't really comment on their specific readiness because I just haven't been following their project management or anything too closely. But Prism is definitely going to be one of the ones on day 0, and probably most of these other clients. I haven't heard feedback where people are worried about their client not being one of those 4 not being in the initial group, but we're all kind of at various phases of being ready or how our audits are going or whatever. So we'll have to wait and see. So if I recall correctly, there was almost perhaps 11 clients at one client teams working at one different point. I don't know how many have dropped off or if they're still working. They don't all need to be ready by phase 0. We just need several to be ready by phase 0, and the rest can catch up later. But also at the same time, we do kind of expect a lot of consolidation, right? A lot of convergence. If you had your best guess, how many client teams do you think that Ethereum will converge upon in the very long term, 5+ years? And if I don't even know if that's a fair question to ask because I'm not technical enough to know. But also, if I could layer in another question, what are the niches going to be that these client teams kind of fill and make themselves distinct from others?
Yeah, I think that just kind of what we see now, that they're in 4 or 5 years, after ETH has been around for a while, there will probably be maybe 5 clients that are really continuously being maintained. At one point, I think there were as many as 8 at a time when we had this retreat, where all the client teams got together and we got to sync the clients for the first time. I think we did 7 at a time, so we had 7 functioning clients at that time. Some of them since then have either dropped out just for lack of interest, and some of them have merged together. I think there'll be probably 5 going forward. So maybe I can talk about some of the clients and what their niche or target audience is. So Start with Nimbus. They've written their client in the NIM programming language, and they're targeting really small devices. So they want to run on phones and things, so low power devices and things like that. So cheap hardware that you probably already have lying around your house. I think that's kind of their goal. Whereas Prism and Lighthouse are kind of targeting a more general audience. So maybe you can run on a Raspberry Pi, which is still pretty cheap hardware, but not quite as something you probably didn't already have. Or maybe you want to run on your laptop or build a specific computer for it. Or maybe you want to run like a fleet of these because you're a superpower user or a staking pool or something. Nimbus and these other ones can do that too, but and especially the one from Consensus, Teku, is enterprise focused. So those are really they're historically been targeting for big banks or big financial industry or whatever, enterprise companies, and then we have other groups like Sigma, not Sigma Prime, but ChainSafe, where they have their implementation Lodestar, which is written in JavaScript, and what they're focused on is a lot of like web tooling. So do you want to interact with Beacon Chain, and do you want to validate using JavaScript, maybe from your web browser or from wherever JavaScript runs, which is pretty much everywhere now.
So it's a combination of hardware differences and hardware specialization, and then also code specialization. Are those really the main differentiators that separate out clients?
I think so. Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess I kind of have two questions for you. I'll start with saying, like, how realistic is it that you can run a full Ethereum node on a phone? Because, I mean, right now, that's not realistic at all. Like, what's different with ETH2 that even makes that a remote possibility?
That's a good point. And I was just thinking about this today, actually. Phase 0, so Ethereum is rolling out in multiple phases, where phase 0 is just the proof of stake, the proof of stake layer. So it's no shards and no contract execution or anything like that. So it's actually pretty easy to run, easy on your resources. So for something like that, it's not out of the question. You could use your phone or like some old Android phone or whatever tablet you got laying around. But as we go to these future phases where there's actually, you have to sync these shards and you're finalizing on a lot of data. And then, of course, when there's contract execution, your resource demand goes up. So maybe then it's not really viable to run on those types of hardware. But actually, if you look at some of the like chips and stuff they're putting in phones these days, like they're actually pretty good. So where is the limit with that? I'm not totally sure. Is it a good idea? Probably not, but at least you have that option if that's something you wanted to do.
And then I guess so I would want to get into like what's Prysmatic optimizing for? Like when you guys are going into designing your client, like what are you guys focusing on?
Yeah, so we're focused mostly on the everyday user. So when I think about users in ETH2 in terms of validators, I think there's a couple buckets you can consider. You have the bucket of people who want to run everything themselves. So they want to run all their hardware. They want to put it in their bunker or whatever. They want to do it in their house. So we try to make Prism really easy for those people to use, for them to monitor it, to understand what's going on. So we have a lot of documentation, things like that. I think there's going to be another bucket of people who want to run their solution entirely in the cloud or partially in the cloud, because it's easier to keep that infrastructure online. Data centers typically don't go offline too often, so it'd be probably better than running in your apartment. And then there are users that want to connect to a staking pool and either have that staking provider or that service provider run some or all of their infrastructure. And maybe that's a custodial solution if that's what they like. But we're targeting those users that want to run everything themselves up to the staking providers themselves, and kind of helping them understand how to use Prism and make it secure and how it works and all these things. So yeah, we're kind of targeting everybody with some sort of modern hardware, modern device.
I guess just to stick on this one more point, how would you characterize like modern hardware? Like what? Like I have a 2019 MacBook Pro 15-inch. It's a beast for what it is.
Yep.
Like, is that enough?
Yeah, I think so. So if you look at the, I'll tell you a secret here. If you look at the specs for Prism, and then you look at the specs for World of Warcraft Classic, they're actually exactly the same because we copied it from their website. So if you can run that game, which is kind of pretty old, right? It's from 2003 or something like that. Then you can run this software. I mean, it's not that hard. If you got 2 cores or 4 cores and you have 8 gigs of RAM and some kind of decent hard drive, then you're going to be fine.
What's going to be the biggest bottleneck that's going to prevent people from running a node? Is it bandwidth? Is it RAM? What's like the most constricted bottleneck? And are all of these bottlenecks generally about the same size in relation to each other, or not?
Right. So at the moment, the biggest bottleneck for syncing to the head of the chain has actually been the CPUs. So Ethereum 2 has a lot more signatures. It seems like a lot more signatures than ETH 1, especially because we have 16,000, almost 17,000 validators to start, and they're all signing everything. They're all voting at least once every 6.5 minutes. So that's actually a lot of data to a lot of signatures to verify. Even when you aggregate them together, which is a clever way to verify at once instead of verifying multiple, you're still using a lot of resources. So right now we're trying to optimize that to be faster and faster. And since there's not a lot of data in the beacon chain, there's almost no data, your disk speed, which has been a big problem for Ethereum 1, is not an issue yet. And memory is not too bad either. There's not a lot going on, not a lot you want to keep in memory. So most implementations are keeping at or below 1 gigabyte of RAM in practical use in some of these test nets, and some of them are going up to 6 gigs of RAM. But like I said, if you have 8 gigs, which most laptops or computers, they have that. And I'm actually running Prism.
Bye, Preston. Okay. While we yeah, he's got 2 of them. While we wait for him, the next 2 subjects I wanted to talk about are the EVM versus EWASM, and then kind of recap the next phases after phase 0, and then talk about like the whole optimistic idea of compounding progress, and like are these phases really as big as phase 0?
Yeah. I would say I need to be off by 4:20.
Oh yeah.
So,
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Let's try not to interrupt too much. Oh man, when's he gonna come back?
This is a bad one. This is real bad.
What was the last thing he said?
He was talking about how RAM memory isn't really an issue. You're not storing a lot of stuff.
Yeah, CPU power. That's the bottleneck.
Yeah, that's a bottleneck. It's pretty good. Super informative so far. I'm learning a lot.
Me too. It's really annoying that Bitcoin Magazine Twitter is suspended.
Why is it suspended?
So they suspended all the blue check marks, and then they've been selectively giving back access. So actually CoinDesk is suspended still too. So CoinDesk is using their CoinDesk Markets Twitter account right now for all their stuff. I think he just logged back in.
Yeah. There we go.
Preston, what's up?
Okay. We lost you. We lost you right at you were talking about how memory isn't really that big of a deal. You're not storing too much stuff, and talking about how the CPU is kind of perhaps the biggest bottleneck.
Yep. Yeah. So quick note: I'm also recording on my side, so we didn't lose that thought. I can recap it if you like for you guys.
I think we did get the main points across. So perhaps if you have nothing more to add, we could just do a hard pivot to a new subject.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I don't have much that goes.
Okay, cool. So after phase 0 comes phase 1, and then phase 1.5, and then phase 2. The Ethereum bull in me, the optimist, says that, okay, there's this concept of compounding progress where, like, now that we have phase 1 like locked in and rolling, phase 1, 1.5, and 2 are, you just have momentum, right? So is that a fair opinion? Do you share that opinion? And then also, what are the big obstacles that we still have to get over that may prevent or may result in delays? In phase 1 and phase 2?
So yeah, I mean, the idea of having this phased rollout means that we could start launching things a little bit faster. Because if we waited until everything was completely done, it would take forever and maybe never even get done. So using this phased rollout approach is really smart. We're starting with phase 0, which is just the beacon chain, just the validating part of it, just proof of stake, basically what taking Casper and launching it alongside Ethereum 1, and then with phase 1, this can actually be implemented in parallel, so we don't actually have to wait until phase 0 is completely launched and the chain started and all that stuff to start working on phase 1. And phase 1 is actually technically pretty lightweight. I mean, there's not all the building blocks are there. We just kind of have to connect things together to get the shards set up and all the subnet topics and getting these nodes communicating about shards. So that's going to go. I think once we get phase 0 launched, things are going to start moving pretty quickly. Likewise with phase 1.5, it's something that we can do in parallel, and likewise with phase 2, a lot of the pieces that we need are actually already done. It's kind of just putting things together and testing it and getting it all buttoned up.
So do you think how would you compare phase 0 development to what you are thinking phase 1 and phase 2 development will look like? Like, how will that change your guys' interactions with the other client teams, with your own internal team? Like, what's going to be the big shift?
Yeah, so part of the shift that will happen internally with Prysmatic is now we're going to be monitoring and supporting phase 0 while we work on phase 1. But Terrence on our team has been implementing phase 1 for a few months, and based on what I've seen from that, it's already almost done. I mean, it's really not a whole lot of work technically, but it needs to be done correctly. So it takes a long time to get it well tested and things implemented with proper, having all this infrastructure to make sure we're not breaking things. And then we'll want to revisit with our, security auditors and try to find any glaring risk or issues with that. So yeah, I think, in terms of communicating with other teams, so we meet every 2 weeks online, and we're always in each other's Discord channels and constantly communicating and sharing ideas. While it is like a competitive space, it's because we're all sort of doing the same thing for the same market share. It's like a really just great group of people to work with, and we're all working together. We all have the same goal, is to get ETH2 launched and to make this all a lot better. So it's all good.
So there's always one aspect of ETH2 which has generally escaped my comprehension, which is like the difference and importance of EWASM versus the EVM. So my understanding of the EVM is like it's this very stable, dependable way to write code, but it's also causes developers like a bunch of frustration and pain for some reason. And then EWASM is supposed to be this new way of writing and deploying code to the Ethereum blockchain that is more generalizable, allows for more developers that aren't because the EVM. I'm kind of out of my wheelhouse here with trying to explain what these things are. Can you explain the EVM and then also why and where EWASM comes into play?
Yep. Okay. So Ethereum runs everything inside of a virtual machine, and that's what EVM stands for, Ethereum Virtual Machine. So with that, you have the software that executes low-level operations. So like move this bit there, add these two numbers together. Machine-level language that executes predictably in the virtual machine, meaning on my device versus your device, different chip architectures, they're all going to execute the same in this virtual environment. That's great, except that now none of the existing languages that are out there know how to compile to these opcodes, know how to translate their high-level language to this machine-level language. So then we had to build things like Solidity and then Viper and other kinds of languages specific to Ethereum, which may have bugs or issues or a learning curve, and people are wondering like, oh, I wish I could just use my favorite language like Python, which is how Viper came around because they wanted something like Python. But with WebAssembly, so with WASM, any high-level language or modern language that supports compiling to WASM with the WASM backend, you could use, in theory, use that to write contracts. So you could be writing contracts in C++ or in Java or really anything that has a LLVM backend for WASM would work. And that brings, just opens up a lot more doors, a lot more opportunity for developers to use existing code that's out there and to also use existing languages that are more mature and that they're familiar with.
So it allows Ethereum to become like more integrated into the world of software and computer science that's already developed, right? Like there's plenty of developers out in the world who know a bunch of languages. And so EWASM allows Ethereum to kind of reach those people without too much of a learning curve, while also being able to access all the infrastructure that's supporting these these old software languages. And the idea is that just makes development on Ethereum go faster. Like everyone can be an app developer on Ethereum because they're already an app developer, for wherever, right? That's the whole goal.
Yeah, exactly.
And so where does EWASM fit in the rollout of Ethereum 2.0? Like where does that plug in?
Yeah, that comes around in phase 2. So after we bring in the shards where all the data lives, we can then start using that data in a meaningful way. So having the state of Ethereum, and since we have multiple shards, we can have multiple states, and that's sort of this parallel sets of states where you get the whole speed up and improvement in scalability from ETH2, because we can now run things more transactions per second, even if it was this, like assuming WASM or EWASM is the same cost or performance as the EVM, you still get 64 times throughput, minus whatever overhead you have for cross-chart transactions. But that really comes in once we've started bringing state and things like that into ETH2 in phase 2.
So do you think that people, approximately 500,000 ETH is going to reliably migrate onto ETH2 even before any sort of programmability is available? And why?
Yep. Yeah. So I think the only people who are going to migrate over before phase 2 are people interested in becoming a validator, because there's not anything else you can do at that time. You don't need ETH. There's nothing. There's literally nothing else you can do. Like you could put data on there, but you might not even have to pay anything for that. So you might, if you're transferring ETH to ETH2 at that time, it's just to be a validator. And the reason you want to be a validator is because the protocols incentivized you to do so. You earn rewards for your participation, and your costs you have fixed costs which are relatively low, at least compared to proof of work. You don't really need super expensive hardware. You don't need ASICs or any GPUs or graphical cards or anything like that. You just use your existing computer, or you can get a $200 computer or something like that. It would be fine.
Well, you need expensive ETH, or potentially.
Yeah,
expensive
it's
ETH.
true. Yeah, you do need 32 ETH to start it, and at the current price, that's, I don't know, 8,500 or so US dollars. Okay, it's gone down since the Twitter crypto scandals, scams. But yeah, I mean, that's really your biggest upfront cost, I guess, is the collateral.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, also the risk, right? Because once you transfer your ETH over, it's not fungible with ETH1 ETH.
Yeah, so you risk, your opportunity cost is you're not able to exit if you really wanted to. So it is kind of a longer term commitment. You're going to be, because eventually everything is going to go over to ETH2, right? Everything will migrate over is the goal. So if you opt in early, you can start earning these rewards and earning ETH with your ETH and having to do minimal work to do that. But yeah, there are risks, like opportunity risk, or if ETH2 blew up in a bad way, then we'll have to do some like recovery hard fork to refund everybody, and that would just be a mess. I mean, it's not going to happen, but there is a way out if there were something bad to happen. We could fix it. I mean, it'd be bad, but it wouldn't be the end of the world.
The plans for a two-way bridge have been totally scrapped, right?
As far as I know, the plan is still to go forward with just the one-way bridge, because it's simpler to do, and we're thinking that the time between Genesis and phase 2 is not that far. I mean, it feels like it would be a long time, maybe a year or two. But in terms of how long it took us to do phase 0, it should not take as long because most of the pieces are already there.
Okay, I have no more questions. CK?
No, I'm good. Preston, thanks so much for coming onto the show. It was really informative getting to pick your brain about these very nuanced topics. So thanks for answering our questions. For our audience, where can they find you, and who do you want to hear from?
Yeah, I'm Preston _Van Loon on Twitter. That's my Twitter handle. You can find more information about Prysmatic Labs at our website, prysmaticlabs.com. From there are resources on how to learn more about ETH, and we really want to hear from people who are interested in staking ETH, or really people that just have questions about it. Because one of the biggest things we've been doing besides building the product is trying to bring around better education around it. So talking to podcast people like you guys, or doing presentations, we really like to do that to share the knowledge. So we want to hear what questions you have where you can't find the answer. So reach out to me on Discord or Twitter or anywhere. You can find me. I'll be happy to talk to you anytime.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks, Preston. Your Twitter handle will be in the show notes, so our listeners can find you there. Thank you for coming on to POV Crypto. You guys can follow the podcast at POV Crypto Pod. You can follow me at Trustless State, both on Twitter and on Bankless. Christian?
Yep, you guys can find me at CK_Snarks and over at Bitcoin Magazine. Make sure to give the show a 5-star rating and review. Thank you very, very much for listening.
Boom. You're still recording, Christian.